The night she finally found the courage to speak was the same night her entire past came knocking at her door. This is the story of Chiamaka, a story that begins when her world went dark. The day Chiamaka's father died, the sun felt different. It didn't just shine, it stared, harsh, empty, and completely uncaring. Her father, Mr. Arins, had been the heart of their family. He was a hard-working bus driver, always cheerful, the kind of man whose laughter could soothe a crying child. He wore his smile like a uniform, even when life was showing him very little kindness. But on one rainy evening, everything changed. A sudden brake failure on the third mainland bridge ended his life, and with it, the life his family knew. Chiamaka was only 10 years old. Her mother, Mama Chichi, wailed until her voice cracked like broken pottery. The grief was suffocating, but life didn't pause for their sorrow. Bills started piling up like unread letters. Food became scarce. The friends who once filled their home with laughter suddenly couldn't be reached. And then came the final blow. The landlord, a man with cold eyes and a sharp tongue, gave them just 7 days to leave the house they called home. 7 days to pack up a lifetime. 7 days to face the terrifying reality of becoming homeless. When the eviction day arrived, their belongings sat outside under the hot sun, like abandoned memories wilting in the heat. Chiamaka clutched her younger siblings, trying to shield them from the stares and whispers, while her mother desperately begged every neighbor she knew for help, for a place to stay, for just a little more time. Hope was fading fast, and that was when life took its darkest, most unexpected turn. A woman from the next compound, someone everyone called Auntie Bose, stepped forward, pretending to show mercy. "Let them stay with me," she announced to the onlookers, her voice filled with false sympathy. "At least until they find their feet." The crowd murmured in approval, praising her kindness, her generosity. But kindness was the last thing Auntie Bose had to offer. That night marked the beginning of a silent, terrifying battle that no child should ever have to fight. As they settled into Auntie Bose's house, a temporary sense of relief washed over them. For a moment, it felt like they had been saved. But on the very first night they slept under her roof, Chiamaka discovered a chilling truth. She realized that some darkness doesn't wait for midnight to reveal itself. Sometimes, it sits right beside you, smiling. What happened to Chiamaka and her family in that house? What secrets was Auntie Bose hiding behind her mask of kindness? Auntie Bose's house always had a strange, lingering smell, like something was constantly burning. It was an unsettling mix of kerosene, perfumed powder, and secrets that clung to the very walls. During the day, she was the picture of a welcoming relative, lavishing the family with warm smiles and generous plates of food. But as soon as night fell, her entire personality would shift, as if a curtain had been drawn across her soul. Chiamaka and her siblings slept on a simple mat in the sitting room, while their mother found rest in the small kitchen area. In this makeshift home, they believed they were safe, sheltered from the harsh realities they had left behind. They were tragically wrong. Almost every single night, when the house fell into a deep quiet and the drone of the generator finally ceased, a light tap would awaken Chiamaka. It was Auntie Bose, her voice a low, chilling whisper in the dark. "Come, I need you." Every time, Chiamaka's heart would freeze in her chest. She knew what that whisper meant, what it demanded of her. She was too young to fully comprehend the twisted nature of it all, yet old enough to feel the profound wrongness that settled deep in her bones. The experience was a silent scream trapped inside her small body, a secret she was forced to carry alone. Sometimes, she tried to resist, to feign sleep or pretend she didn't hear. But Auntie Bose's response was always swift and brutal. The whispers would turn into harsh, guttural threats. "You want me to throw your entire family out? Is that what you want? Do you want to sleep on the cold, hard street? Do you want to starve?" The fear was a powerful weapon, and it always worked. Chiamaka felt completely isolated in her terror. Her mother was already drowning in a sea of her own grief, desperately struggling to find small, menial jobs just to put food on their plates. Chiamaka couldn't bear the thought of adding another heavy burden to her mother's already collapsing world. So she endured. With each new ordeal, the emotional scars deepened, etching themselves onto her soul. Yet, for her younger siblings, she held herself together. She was their big sister, their protector, and she would not let them see her break. She became an expert at hiding the darkness, at pasting on a brave face even when she felt like she was crumbling from the inside out. The smell of burning kerosene became the scent of her fear, the powder a reminder of the mask her abuser wore. The house that was meant to be a sanctuary had become her private prison, and the nights were her sentence. She learned to count the hours until dawn, praying for the sun to rise and chase the monsters away, even if only for a little while. The days offered a brief respite, a fragile illusion of normalcy, but the nights always returned, bringing with them the same whisper, the same dread, the same violation. But everything was about to change. It happened on a day when Chiamaka was tasked with cleaning Onibosa's room. Her heart pounded as she worked, terrified of being in that space. But a flicker of defiance, or perhaps just curiosity, made her do something she had never dared to do before. She looked under Onibosa's bed, and there, hidden away in a dusty old box, she found something. Something that didn't just expose Onibosa's cruelty, but revealed that the woman's darkness was born from a story far more twisted and tragic than anyone could ever have imagined. Under Chiamaka's bed, hidden by years of dust, was a secret. She'd found it by accident, a small wooden box she kicked while sweeping. It was locked, scratched, with the initials B, A, and the year 1992 carved into the lid. When she'd kicked it, it made a dull, heavy sound, like something solid was trapped inside. All that day, as she went about her chores, she felt Onibosa's eyes on her. It wasn't the usual glare of annoyance or the sharp look that preceded a scolding. This was different. It was an intense, unsettling gaze, filled with an emotion Chiamaka couldn't name. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It felt broken. The look unsettled her far more than any of her aunt's usual cruelty. Later that night, long after the house had fallen silent, the box called to her. Why was it locked away under her bed of all places? And who was B.A.? Curiosity finally won. She crept out of bed, the floorboards cold against her bare feet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she carefully slid the box out from under the bed. It felt heavy in her hands, heavier than it looked. She held it close, tracing the carved initials with her thumb. What happened to this woman? Why is she the way she is? The questions swirled in her mind, a frantic storm of what-ifs. She was just about to try and find a way to open it, to pry at the lock, when a sound from the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopped right outside her door. The handle turned. The door creaked open. Her silhouette was rigid, a dark figure against the dimly lit hall. But it was her eyes that held Chiamaka captive. They were red and swollen, glistening with tears that hadn't yet fallen. The sight was so shocking, so out of character, that Chiamaka couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She braced herself for the inevitable shouting, the slap, the punishment that was sure to follow. But it never came. Instead, her aunt's voice, barely a whisper, cut through the silence. Drop that box, unless you are ready to know the kind of pain that destroys a person forever. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Chiamaka froze, her fingers numb against the wood. In that moment, for the first time, she saw past the harsh exterior, past the years of bitterness. She saw a flicker of something else in her aunt's eyes, a deep, buried heartbreak, a wound that had festered for decades, never healing, poisoning everything it touched. She finally understood. It was the result of a pain so immense it had turned empathy into stone. Without a word, Chiamaka slowly, carefully, pushed the box back under the bed, sliding it deep into the darkness. She stepped back, away from her aunt, away from the secret. The box was hidden again, but the questions now lived inside her heart, heavier than ever. But the truth, locked away in that wooden box, has a way of finding the light. And when it finally did, it would lead Chiamaka down a path she never could have imagined. By the time Chiamaka entered SS1, she was an expert at wearing a smile that wasn't her own. It was a mask she put on every morning, a bright, cheerful disguise that hid the shadows lingering from her past. School was her sanctuary, the one place where the daylight was so bright that no one could darken it for her. It was her escape, a structured world of books and lessons where she could almost forget. And then, she met Abub. He was tall, with a quiet voice and a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. He was different from the other boys in their class. While they were busy with teasing and foolish games, Abub was the one who noticed when her stack of books was too heavy and would help her carry them without a word. When a group of girls started whispering and mocking her worn-out shoes, he didn't join in. Instead, he walked over later and said, so gently she almost didn't hear him, "You walk with dignity. Shoes don't define you." His words were like a balm to a wound she didn't even know was still open. From that day on, Ibube became the brother she never had, the friend she had always desperately needed. He was her anchor in the chaotic sea of high school. Their friendship grew deeper and more solid with each passing year. He wasn't just a fair-weather friend, he was a true confidant. He started sharing his own struggles with her, the pressure from his family, his fears about the future. His vulnerability made it safe for her to be vulnerable too. And so, she shared everything with him. She told him about her dreams, her fears, her favorite subjects, and the little things that made her happy. She shared every piece of her life, except one. That part of her story, the darkness that clung to her memories, was still buried too deep, locked away in a place she was too afraid to visit, even with him. By the time they reached SS3, their final year, Ibube had become her quiet, steadfast protector. He didn't make a big show of it, but his presence was a shield. When some of the older, more aggressive senior boys tried to bully her or corner her, Ibube would suddenly appear, standing between them like an unmovable wall. He never had to raise his voice. His calm, firm presence was enough to make them back down. He had a sixth sense for her pain, and she would sneak away to cry silently behind the old classroom block. He always found her. He wouldn't ask what was wrong right away. He would just sit with her, offering a quiet solidarity that meant more than any words. After a while, he'd look at her and say, "You are stronger than your past, Chiamaka." And when he said it, she believed him. With Ibube by her side, Chiamaka began to heal. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but a slow, gradual mending of her broken spirit. Each kind word, each shared laugh, each moment of quiet understanding was like a tiny stitch, slowly pulling the pieces of her back together. She started to see a future for herself, one that wasn't defined by what had happened to her. She started to hope. So, the day Ibube turned to her, his eyes full of a sincerity that she had come to trust completely, and said, "I want to take care of you, marry you someday." She didn't see the storm that was gathering on the horizon. His words should have been a comfort, a beautiful promise. Love had never scared her before because it had never felt real. But this time it was. And just as she was beginning to embrace it, she had no idea that destiny had other, much crueler plans in store. Ibube's promise was like watching the sunrise for the first time after a decade of storms. It filled every broken part of Chiamaka with a warm, golden light. He was a boy of his word. He finished secondary school early, not with his head buried in books, but with his hands learning a trade. Soon enough, he started earning his own money. But it wasn't the money that mattered to Chiamaka. It was the way he treated her, with a gentleness so profound it felt like the rarest treasure she had ever been given. In a life that had been harsh and unforgiving, his kindness was a soft place to land. Her mother, who had watched her daughter weather so many storms, saw this and her heart swelled with approval. She once told Chiamaka, "Any man who values your tears, my daughter, is a blessing from God." And Ibube truly was. He cherished her. Their relationship wasn't just a quiet affection between two people. It was a story that blossomed for everyone to see. People in the village would watch them and smile. They saw the humble boy with big dreams in his eyes, and the quiet, resilient girl who had survived so much without a word of complaint. They were a perfect match, a testament to hope. The years rolled by, and with each passing year, Ibube's hard work paid off. His small trade grew, and his success became more and more apparent. He went from sharing a room with his brothers to renting his own small, neat apartment. It was a space that symbolized his journey, his ambition. And one evening, in that very apartment, surrounded by the smell of paint and the promise of a future, he got down on one knee. He asked Chiamaka to be his wife. The yes that escaped her lips was carried on a wave of trembling joy. It was a word she had never thought she would get to say with such certainty. For the very first time in her life, Chiamaka felt truly chosen. She felt seen for who she was, not for the scars she carried. She felt safe. Their wedding wasn't a grand affair with lavish decorations or hundreds of guests. It was simple, intimate, and incredibly beautiful. They rented a string of lights that cast a warm glow over the small courtyard. Surrounded by a close circle of friends and family, They danced. They danced with a lightness in their steps, their hearts full of hope for the future they were building together. Later that night, as the world outside grew quiet, she lay in his arms and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for loving me." He held her closer, his embrace a silent promise of protection, of a lifetime of love. It was a perfect moment, a perfect beginning. But life has a cruel way of teaching us that even the hands that promise comfort, the same hands that hold you so gently, can learn a different, darker language. They can learn cruelty. The first sign of this change came quietly. It was so subtle, so easy to dismiss, that she almost missed it. She explained it away, made excuses, and pushed the unease down. She ignored it until the day came when the bruises were no longer just on her heart, but became a part of her reflection in the mirror. The change wasn't sudden. It didn't happen overnight. It began with a slow simmer of frustration, bubbling up into raised voices, and then boiling over into the slam of a door. Ibube, the man who was once the definition of tender, began to change. He became irritable, impatient, possessive. His business, once his pride, was now a source of deep anxiety. It was facing setback after setback, but instead of turning to me, his partner, he turned inward. He bottled up every worry, every fear, until the pressure became too much and the bottle exploded. The first time he shouted at me, a torrent of words I never thought I'd hear from him. He came back later with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Chi," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I'm just so stressed." And I forgave him. Of course I did. The next time, it wasn't just words. He grabbed my arms during an argument, his grip so tight it left faint, bluish marks on my skin. He blamed it on exhaustion, the long hours, the sleepless nights. And again, I forgave him. It was a mistake, a momentary loss of control. That's what I told myself. But the first time he hit me, something inside me shattered. It wasn't just the sharp, stinging pain on my cheek. It was the betrayal. It was the sound of the one safe place I had ever known, his love, cracking and falling to pieces around me. The illusion was gone. The man I had built my life with, the father of my children, had hurt me. Yet I stayed. I looked at our two boys, so beautiful, so bright. They adored their father. They saw him as their hero. Their world was built on the foundation of our family, and I couldn't bear to be the one to tear it down. They needed stability, a home, a father. I convinced myself that I could take the hits, both verbal and physical, to shield my children from the tempest raging within our home. I believed I could contain it, manage it, survive it for their sake. But storms don't stay contained forever. I learned that the hard way. One afternoon, my oldest son, my sweet boy, came home from school. As he walked through the door, my heart stopped. His lip was swollen and split, a dark purple bruise already forming. I rushed to him, my hands trembling as I gently touched his face. "What happened? Who did this to you?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a confusion and fear that mirrored my own. And when he finally answered, his small voice shook the very ground beneath my feet. "Mummy, it was Daddy." The whisper from my son, his little eyes trembling with a fear no child should ever know, shattered my world. Everything just froze. I knew Abube was changing, that a darkness had been creeping into our home, but I never, ever imagined it would touch the children. In that single, horrifying moment, I felt my heart collapse in slow motion, piece by painful piece. How could I have been so blind? How did I let it get this far? That night, after tucking the boys into bed and kissing their tear-stained cheeks, I waited. When Abube came home, I confronted him. The words barely left my mouth before he exploded. It was like uncorking a volcano. "You think I'm the problem?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the walls we had built together. "You think you're so much better than me? Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under every single day?" His anger filled the entire house, a toxic cloud of fury. I instinctively shielded the children's bedroom door with my own body, as if I could physically block out his rage. The man I married was gone, replaced by this monster. The next morning, the sun rose on a broken home. There was no discussion, no second thoughts. While he was out, I moved with a desperate, mechanical efficiency. I packed 2 small bags for the boys, just the essentials. Toys, clothes, their favorite blankets. Then, with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, we walked out the front door, and I didn't look back. I had no idea where we were going. I had no plan, no money, just a fierce, primal need to get my children away, to get them to safety. Just like all those years ago, I found myself adrift, begging for shelter. The shame was a physical weight on my shoulders. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just me. I had two small, innocent boys to protect. I looked at their confused faces, and a wave of determination washed over the fear. History was repeating itself, a cruel, vicious cycle. But I swore, right then and there, that I would not let it consume me again. I would not be a victim. We found refuge at my mother's house. It was a temporary solution, a safe haven in the storm. But safety didn't mean peace. Every night, after the boys were asleep, I would cry, quietly, so no one could hear. I didn't cry because I missed my husband or the life I had lost. I cried because I was terrified. Terrified that I was becoming my own mother. That helpless woman I watched suffer in silence for so many years. Was I strong enough to break the pattern? Or was I doomed to repeat her mistakes, passing this legacy of pain down to my own sons? It was a fear that ate me alive from the inside out. And just when I thought things couldn't possibly get any worse, just when I was at my absolute lowest, a familiar face reappeared. A ghost from my past, someone I never expected to see again. And they weren't just bringing back old memories. They were carrying a secret that had been locked away for years, hidden in a dusty wooden box under Auntie Bose's bed. A secret that was about to change everything. It was a quiet Saturday morning. But then a knock. Sharp and unexpected. Chiamaka opened the door and her world just stopped. Standing there, on her doorstep, was Auntie Bose. She was older, much thinner than Chiamaka remembered, and her eyes, once hard as stone, now looked soft, almost fragile. Chiamaka, Bose said, her voice slow, each syllable heavy. I heard what happened. I came to talk. A tremor ran through Chiamaka. It was a chaotic storm inside her. Hot anger, cold fear, and the raw, jagged edges of old trauma all crashing together. How did you find me? She managed to whisper, her voice barely there. I never stopped checking on you. Bose's voice cracked. From afar. I owe you the truth, Chiamaka. Every instinct screamed at Chiamaka to slam the door, to lock it, to barricade herself from this ghost from her past. But something held her back. A desperate, aching need for closure. A need for answers that had haunted her for years. So, against her better judgment, she stepped aside. Bose sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands shaking so much she had to clench them in her lap. That box, she began, her gaze distant, fixed on a memory. The box you found under my bed, it was my life. My life before the wickedness took me. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Inside that box were letters. My letters. Bose explained that those letters were cries for help. As a child, she herself had been horribly abused by her own guardian. She had written to family. She had told friends. She had begged anyone who would listen for help. But no one believed her. They called her a liar, an attention seeker. The years of pain, of being silenced and dismissed, twisted something inside her. It hardened her, poisoned her, until she became the very monster she had once feared. Tears, real and gut-wrenching, streamed down Bose's face, carving paths through the wrinkles. I wronged you, Chiamaka, she sobbed. I broke you. And I am so sorry. I know you can never forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I had to come here. I had to say it. And then, Chiamaka cried too. Not tears of forgiveness. Not yet. But tears of release. It was like a dam breaking inside her chest, washing away years of suffocating silence. The chains that had bound her for so long finally began to loosen their grip. The weight on her soul started to lift, inch by agonizing inch. She wasn't ready to forgive, but for the first time, she felt a sliver of freedom. But the story wasn't over. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She had one more revelation. Something she had overheard just last week. Something about Chiamaka's husband, her rock, her safe harbor. Something that was about to shatter Chiamaka's new reality all over again. Your husband, Ibube, has been meeting with someone. Someone who wants custody of your children. Chiamaka's heart stopped. His new partner. The words felt like knives entering her chest, each one sharper than the last. It wasn't enough that Ibube had shattered her trust and hurt the children with his betrayal. Now, he wanted to take them away completely. He plans to accuse you of being unstable, Bose continued, her voice trembling slightly. He's preparing documents. building a case to paint you as an unfit mother. Chiamaka felt the ground spin beneath her feet, the room tilting precariously. Not her boys. He could take anything else, but not them. Just then, her mother rushed into the room, her face etched with alarm from the raised voices. What is going on? What's happened? Seeing her mother's worried expression, Chiamaka's strength finally gave way. She collapsed into her arms, the sobs she'd been holding back racking her body. My children, they want to take them away from me. Her mother held her tight, a fierce, protective energy radiating from her. A fire Chiamaka hadn't seen in years ignited in her mother's eyes, and her voice hardened with a resolve that was as unyielding as steel. Over my dead body. That night, sleep was a distant stranger. Chiamaka lay awake, staring blankly at the dark ceiling as a relentless tide of memories rushed over her. Her father's sudden death, the grief that had hollowed out her world, the shock of being left homeless, adrift with no anchor, the long, lonely nights filled with silent pain and unshed tears. And then, the crushing weight of her husband's betrayal, the man she had built a life with, turning his back on her and their family. She could still hear her children's confused and tearful questions, questions she had no answers for. Each memory was a fresh wound, a reminder of every time she had been knocked down, every time she had felt lost and powerless. In the past, her instinct was to run, to escape the pain. But this time was different. Lying there in the darkness, a new clarity washed over her. This wasn't just about her pain anymore. This was about her children's future, their safety, their happiness. She couldn't run. She had to fight back with everything she had. She had to protect them. This time, she would be the rock, the shield, the warrior her boys needed her to be. As dawn approached, a quiet determination settled in her heart, replacing the despair. She would not let him win. She would not let him rewrite her story or define her as a mother. She would fight for her sons until her last breath. And then, just as the first light of day began to streak across the sky, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. The voice on the other end was unexpected, a ghost from a past she thought was long buried. The call was an offer, a lifeline, opening a door she believed was forever closed, and with it, a chance she never thought she'd have again. A familiar ringtone shattered the silence. It was Abube. Chiamaka's finger hovered over the decline button, a storm of emotions swirling within her. She almost didn't answer, but something compelled her to swipe right. She held the phone to her ear, saying nothing. Chiamaka. His voice was a fragile whisper, a sound she hadn't heard since they were young and full of dreams. It trembled, laced with a desperation that sent a shiver down her spine. I'm in trouble. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. She waited, her own breath caught in her throat. He took a ragged breath before continuing. My business partner. He scammed me. He took everything. A choked sob escaped him. I'm in so much debt. The plea was raw, stripped of all the arrogance and pride she had grown to associate with him. Then came the words that truly stunned her. Chiamaka froze. He was afraid of losing them. This was the man who had seemed so indifferent, who had let them slip through his fingers like grains of sand. The man who chose his ambition over his family time and time again. It didn't add up. Why now? Why this sudden fear of a loss that had already happened in so many ways? The line went dead, leaving her in a state of bewildered confusion. His fear felt genuine, but the timing was all wrong. Hours crawled by, each minute feeling like an eternity as she replayed his desperate words in her head. Then, her phone rang again. Cautiously, she answered. Hello, is this Chiamaka? A professional, stern voice asked. Her heart plummeted. The officer explained that Abube had turned himself in. He had gotten entangled with fraudulent partners, and the entire scheme had imploded. As she listened to the details of his self-destruction, a strange emotion washed over her. It was pity, a profound, aching pity for a man who had lost his way, a broken man who had sacrificed everything real in his relentless chase for money. But even as pity softened her edges, her resolve remained unshaken. Her children were her world, her priority. Nothing would ever compromise their safety and stability. The officer's next words, however, pierced through her resolve like a shard of glass. Madam, he said, his tone softening slightly. He listed you as his next of kin. You're the only person he trusts. Her heart didn't just ache, it cracked. In his darkest hour, At the absolute rock bottom of his life, she was still his anchor. She was the one he leaned on when the world came crashing down. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. She had to face him, not as a wife, but as the mother of his children, the only link to the man he once was. As she walked towards the imposing gray building of the police station, her mind was a whirlwind of questions and anxieties. The cool evening air did little to calm her racing pulse. She pulled her coat tighter, her steps firm on the pavement, a lone figure moving towards an uncertain future. But what she couldn't possibly know was that her past was about to collide with her present in the most unexpected way. Just beyond the glow of the station's entrance lights, concealed in the shadows, someone was waiting. Someone who had been searching for her for years, and whose arrival was about to change everything all over again. Suddenly, a deep, gentle voice called her name. Chiamaka turned, her heart skipping a beat. Standing there was a man she hadn't seen in years, a man whose features were so familiar, yet different. It was Ibub's elder brother, Chabik. He had just returned from overseas. The moment he heard about the horrific abuse Chiamaka had endured, he had started searching for her, desperate to find her and the children. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with a profound sadness and regret. "Chiamaka," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, "you deserved so much better. You still do." His words were like a balm on a wound she didn't even know was still open. In his gaze, she saw a genuine kindness, a warmth she had once believed was lost to the world forever. He looked at her, then at the children huddled by her side, and his expression was one of sincere apology. "I am so sorry," Chabik continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I should have known. I should have done something sooner." He wasn't making excuses. He was taking on a burden of guilt that wasn't his to carry. "I will support you and the children," he promised, his tone firm and resolute. "Whatever you need, I'll be there." It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a statement of pure, unconditional support, a promise of family. It was a powerful reminder that not all men were destructive storms like his brother. Some were a safe harbor, a steady hand in the chaos. His presence gave Chiamaka a newfound strength. It was one thing to decide to stand up for herself, but having someone stand with her, someone who believed in her without question, made all the difference. Together, they walked towards the police station. The air was heavy, but Chiamaka's steps were lighter than they had been in years. She was no longer just a victim running from her past. She was a survivor, walking towards justice. When they entered the station, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. And there, in a holding cell, was Ibub. He fell to his knees, his hands gripping the cold steel bars. He reached his hands through the bars, his fingers trembling as he tried to hold their tiny hands. "I'm so sorry." Watching him, something shifted inside Chiamaka. A lock that had been frozen shut for years finally clicked open. It wasn't forgiveness. No, what he had done was unforgivable. But it was something else, something just as powerful. It was release. The heavy chains of anger and fear that had bound her to him for so long finally fell away. She saw him not as the monster who haunted her nightmares, but as a pathetic, broken man, trapped in a cage of his own making. In that moment, he lost his power over her. She was free, not just from his physical grasp, but from the prison he had built in her mind. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, the path ahead was not dark and terrifying. It was a path she could walk on her own terms, towards a future she would build for herself and her children. She looked at him, her eyes tired but clear, a kind of clarity that only comes after the storm has passed. She said, "You need healing." For years, their home had been a battlefield. Every conversation was a landmine, every silence a truce that was bound to be broken. They had loved each other once, with a ferocity that felt like it could conquer the world. But life, with its relentless pressures and unspoken resentments, had chipped away at that love, leaving behind two strangers who only knew how to wound each other. He'd lost his job, and with it, a piece of himself. She'd tried to hold everything together, her hands raw from gripping the fraying edges of their life. Their children, caught in the crossfire, had learned to make themselves small, to disappear into the wallpaper whenever the shouting started. It was a vicious cycle of anger, blame, and regret. He'd retreat into a shell of bitterness, and she'd lash out, her words sharpened by desperation. They were drowning, and in their panic, they were pulling each other further under. But this time, it was different. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no bitter accusations hanging in the air like smoke. Just a quiet, heartbreaking acceptance. Ibube nodded weakly, the fight finally gone from his eyes. They couldn't heal each other. They could only reopen old wounds. Staying together wasn't an act of love anymore. It was an act of slow, mutual destruction. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the silence wasn't heavy with what was unsaid, but light with the possibility of a new beginning, albeit a separate one. It was a final, painful admission that the best thing they could do for each other, and for their children, was to let go. She picked up the single bag she had packed. Just a few clothes, her grandmother's locket, and a faded photograph of the five of them from a time when smiles came easily. She paused at the door, her hand hovering over the knob. She wanted to say something more, something to bridge the years of pain, but the words wouldn't come. A simple glance back was all she could manage. It was a look that said everything and nothing. Goodbye. I'm sorry. I wish you well. He just stood there, a solitary figure in the middle of the living room they had built together, now a museum of their failed marriage. The air was thick with ghosts of laughter and echoes of arguments. As she stepped outside, the cool evening air felt like a shock to her system. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that didn't feel constricted in years. She was a single mother now. The thought was terrifying and liberating all at once. What would she do? But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light of the street, she saw a figure waiting by the curb, standing next to a nondescript car. The person stepped forward, a gentle but official air about them. It was a government social worker. The woman offered a small, sympathetic smile and said, "I have some news about your children. News that's going to change everything."